In 1577, a Parisian merchant specially asked violin maker Nicolas Aubry to make 4 violins in the Cremonese manner. This means that violins with characteristics different from those of the Cremonese were being made in Paris at that time. But what did these so-called common violins look like? Before 1650, archaic techniques were used in which the parts were joined without the use of a mold. The top block and the neck were made from a single piece of wood, to which the ribs were fastened with wedges in a groove. The ribs were often inserted into a groove along the edge of the back, without linings. And at the corners, they were glued in mitre, without corner blocks. To make the joint sufficiently strong, the ribs were often left longer, resulting in elongated corners. These techniques, stemming from the tradition of shaping the neck, back and ribs from a single piece of wood, lay at the very origin of the violin's shape itself. The use of protruding edges and straight ribs is logical, as they are inserted in grooves in the back and neck. Because no mold is used, the outlines of archaic violins exhibit striking variations. They are often asymmetrical, and the contour of the top can differ from that of the back. All this differs significantly from the construction methods used in lutes and viols. The ribs are usually bent around a mold and glued to the top block, and the joint between the body and neck is reinforced with a metal nail. In Lombardy, and more specifically in Cremona, these lute and viol making techniques were adopted early on by violin makers and applied amidst the already existing archaic traditions. The F-hole, the most striking visual feature of the archaic violin, had 2 equally sized circular ends above and below, asymmetric and often large indentations, and sharp angles at the so-called wings. They differ markedly from those on Cremonese and Brescian violins. The arching of the top and back is neither exceptionally high nor particularly low. Sometimes the flutings around the edges are not very deep or even absent, and as for the thicknessing in extant instruments, it is more or less the same for the top and the back. Purfling was apparently not a standard element in early violin making, and if present it often does not extend very far into the long corners. Double purfling was a common ornamentation before the mid-17th century and is therefore also found in Brescia, without necessarily being typically Brescian. Alemannic violins usually have double purfling on the top and sometimes single on the back, often merging into elaborate marquetry. Multiple interwoven squares inherited from medieval patterns are a typical ornamentation of archaic violins. They were applied to the shoulders or near the upper and lower part of the back of the instrument adjacent the purfling. Floral patterns are not uncommon either. Small plant motifs were sometimes painted in black or gold in the cornice of the top and back. Written sources from Paris mention decorated violins and dancing master kits. One spontaneously thinks of the richly painted instruments attributed to Andrea Amati and a number of French makers. Normally the bass bar is glued on, close to the F-hole on the bass side, but in archaic violins much experimentation occurred. Along the entire center line, placed diagonally, or even curved to the side. It can have the usual shape and location, but it is carved from the mass off the top. A bridge with one leg extending through a hole in the soundboard down to the back was probably the first type of sound post. And just before 1600, a rectangular piece of split spruce was placed in the center of a violin. Mercian is the first scholar to locate the sound post under the treble bridge foot. The neck was usually thicker, wider, and often shorter than the modern violin neck. During the 16th century, the old sickle shape of the peg box was gradually replaced by the S shape. The sides of the peg box are often very thick, requiring recesses on the insides to accommodate the highest and lowest strings. The scrolls resemble the shapes known today, but the number of windings can vary. The transition from the flat sides of the peg box to the scroll was often not smooth, but abrupt. Sometimes even the fluting around the scroll, which could be single or double, ended abruptly at the back of the peg box. So the crowning was considered an independent component. This was also emphasized when it was painted black or when the head was made of another material, ivory, metal, clay, or plaster. Violin bridges had rounded or pointed arches, with the trefoil arch being an important variation. At some point, the height of the arches was reduced so the old arch types were adapted by depressing them. The heart was a remnant of the center arch of the trefoil, which first narrowed as the two lower ends approached each other, and then the upper part was separated from the arch. Around 1600, two new elements altered the original S-shaped bridge sides. The circular segment was moved downwards and towards the center. The violin bridge gradually became narrower at the feet and wider at the top. Before the mid-18th century, the bridge had no fixed location. The notches of the F-hole were not intended as a reference point for positioning the bridge. The wedge-shaped fingerboard compensated for the small neck angle. Its end was often brace-shaped or otherwise, sometimes referencing the arch of the lower bridge. The tailpieces were straight or baluster-shaped, the oldest one still flat. They were usually made of the same wood as the fingerboard and often had similar decorations. Tuning pegs, like bridges, were produced in large numbers. They are inserted deep into the peg box. The origin of the typically crescent-shaped peg heads is probably found in the three semi-hemispheres at the top of older pegs. Sometimes a small ball was turned at the end of the peg, which is normally sawn straight off. The tailpieces were attached to a protrusion of the back or to a hook bar inserted through the ribs, but more often a turned button or even a simple tuning peg was used. Bass violins were often fitted with a strap, so that the instrument could be played while walking or standing. But why haven't more common violins survived? There was undoubtedly a change in taste in the mid-17th century. As Italian music gained popularity, so did the Italian violins, and the archaic instruments were soon considered old-fashioned. Before then, the names off-makers now considered the founders of violin making are rarely found. References are made to places like Cremona, Brescia, or Venice, but also to Paris, Cambrai, Flanders, or Picardy, and to makers who can no longer be associated with any surviving instrument.